Hello and how you doing, folks? Yours truly, Randee here for another edition of today's talk. Today we spoke to a good friend of the show, Dr. Marco Clark, who's the founder of the Richard Wright Public Charter School down there in Washington, D.C. And today we spoke about propaganda and how it's been used and still is being used against black people, and how it's being used today. He had much to say about it, as did I. Very thought-provoking interview as we explained and delved into some of the images that we see on television, images that we have seen in the past, and how that's still continuing on today, and to some degree, how we are continuing to feed into those images as it weakens what we might have to say, and weakens our ability to be taken seriously in our society when it comes to certain issues, especially issues like this. He touched a little bit on hip hop music, as well as some of the decisions that we make as a people that may feed into propaganda. And I even discussed an issue, no, not an issue, it was a comment by Dr. Umar Johnson. I'm going to leave the tiny URL tag for you to look at that, what he had to say about how black people tend to not take propaganda seriously. We take it as a form of entertainment, which is much to our own detriment. Once you hear what he has to say about that, it will definitely it'll make you think. It will make you think, as will this interview. This is yours truly, Randy Rand, and thank you for the time. And we're back. Yours truly, Randy Rand here for another edition of today's talk. And we're talking with Dr. Marco Clark, who's a friend of the show. And we're going to be discussing how has propaganda been used against black people and how it's being used today. As I mentioned, Dr. Marco Clark is a friend of the show. He's also the founder of the Richard Wright Public Charter School in Washington, D.C. He's known as America's toughest principal, and he's the host of Tough Talk, and we're going to get into that a little bit later on. How you doing, Dr. Clark?
I'm fantastic. How are you?
I cannot complain, sir. Thank you so very much for giving us some of your very valuable time today. And I want to start off by giving the definition of propaganda. And it's information or ideas or rumors deliberately spread widely to help or harm a person, group, movement, institution, nation, or etc. It's also defined as the particular doctrines or principles propagated by an organization or movement. And I'm getting that from dictionary.com, which is leading me to my first question. If you could please speak about how successful propagandists have been in their negative depictions of African Americans for many years, and how many African Americans have lost their lives because of ignorant people buying into the hype.
I tell you, one of the things that really comes to my mind is that all black people eat chicken and watermelon.
Mm-hmm.
I think the propaganda of that has been a very detrimental piece to the whole African American community, and I think from that we built several different other propagandas that come behind it. That all black churches are about shouting and hooping and hollering. That we celebrate things a different way. And so this propaganda has created a concept that really pushes the fact that African Americans are different, that we're not Americans, that we're not part of this country, and we bought into that concept of saying, well, I'm not really American. When you were born and bred here, you were your grandmother was born and bred here, and so on and so forth down the line. And we have not particularly staked our claim here because we've been a part of this propaganda, which in a sense has led others to be able to continue to create negative stereotypes about us as a culture, and with they've been able to, we've been able to be susceptible to other negative things that has caused us to be set back years.
Now, talking about propaganda from a historic point of view, there have been many instances where African Americans have been on the quote unquote enemies list throughout history. Once this distinction is successfully made to the public, it makes for an easy time treating African Americans as less than human, doesn't it? If you could please speak to this.
It really does. If you could take the Nat Turner's rebellion and look at the ideology of that Nat was a young man who was taught to read, but his reading was only available for certain books. That there were books that were not relevant for the African American kid, and so when you look at how that propaganda has been, hundreds of years that we've been less than, and the ideology is that we've been taught and beat that was a way for us to be less than. And as we come out and we look at Nat Turner, what turned his rebellion into this really process was the fact that he got angry, and so with him getting angry, it was almost a bad thing in the eyes of others. Like, how did this man get, have the right to be angry at those who were oppressing him? And so the propaganda has continued on from even that point, that up to now, when we have African Americans who are selling to different careers, different jobs, and high positions, that we still question our validity and question whether or not we belong. And so this propaganda has put us in a mindset that we, no matter if we say it loudly or not, that we are a second class when it comes down to race and culture, and that in many instances our own race has put ourselves behind. When you ask students who are the smartest kids, when you look around, there's an Asian and a Hispanic and a Chinese. Our particular students will always say, well, the Asian student is smarter, or the white student is smarter, or the person from a different culture. And that propaganda has built us to this point to make us believe that.
Now, I've heard Dr. Umar Johnson state that, and I'm paraphrasing, that black people tend to not understand propaganda as a tool that's used to harm us because we see it as entertainment, through the lens of the mediums we consume it, like TV, radio, newspapers, etc. What's your opinion about this and why?
I can agree with my brother Umar Johnson, and we look at several of the shows that Tyler Perry has created. A lot of buffoonery, and tends to make people think that buffoonery and coonery is okay, and that's a solid depiction of the African American community. We look at one of the shows, Meet the Browns. It is of course, it has a comical twist to it, but the undertone of it sets us up for a moment in time that shows that we are still lacking in smarts, that we're lacking in culture, that we're lacking in smarts the way it is depicted. And many of us get caught up and don't realize that show in itself, and many others just like that, is not a solid depiction. Give or take however you feel about Bill Cosby, one of the things that was so important and which I think was a benefactor is the fact that he created a show that depicted us in a very, very positive manner. But when you look at some of the comments based on when the show was out, that wasn't a real world for many African Americans, and a lot of us even got upset, wanting to know why Bill would create a show that didn't properly set a depiction of what an African American family would look like. And I thought it was just despicable that we would create that commentary, and it was all based on propaganda that was put out there by the media and things that happened over hundreds of years that we bought into, and therefore we became blinded that we could not be a culture that could be positive, where the mother could be a lawyer and the father could be a doctor. It wasn't possible, and that became part of what the depiction was based on propaganda.
I thoroughly agree with that, and you mentioned the Cosby Show. Bill Cosby did a fantastic job of setting the standard. He set the bar, or even reset the bar, some might even argue, when he created that show. I thoroughly enjoyed that show. I could understand what a lot of people were saying. You know, well, that's not reality. That's not reality. I'm like, well, if that's not reality, that's the problem. Okay, and certainly he did a fantastic job at raising the bar with that show. To tell you the truth, I don't think we in Black America can view that show enough. You know, and say what you want about Bill Cosby, feel whatever you want about Bill Cosby. I think his that show alone is an immense work that spoke to the standard of we as African Americans aiming high. Certainly.
And I think what folks have not understood is the fact that we should really be angered now that even though the show began in the early '80s, it is a show that I was a kid at the time
Mm-hmm.
when the Cosby Show came on,
Me too.
and I was able to pattern myself in a mindset. I wanted to go to college, that I could actually become a doctor,
Mm-hmm.
that I could have a great middle class life with a nice family, and that I had something positive to look towards. Even though I had the home setting that was a positive depiction, I thought about that being a model for those who did not have that. And now with the generation the way it is with this these millennials who have no parents that are not doing their job, they're not teaching history to our kids, they're not there's no streamline of family to go to. There's no big mama or granddad to have stories about what happened years ago. Those kind of shows are something that we can continue to use as a model, and I think it's just sad. It's very sad that we don't have that to show our own families. I know for the before they took it off the air, I would see my own family and watch my daughter and show her that this is the depiction of what an African American family could be like if you work hard and stay focused.
Okay, now I'm a firm believer that if we as African Americans had the full understanding that propaganda, whether it's self inflicted or otherwise, leads to many of the harsh, cruel, and demeaning policies that we protest so vehemently, we'd take it more seriously. What's your opinion about this?
I think that we definitely need to take this mindset more seriously, and I'll just because some of us never really want to be as hard on each other as we need to be, and I think the reality is that now we have to stand up and require excellence out of our community. When we were growing up, there was a requirement that the generation after you did better than the generation before.
Yes.
And that requirement has not been lifted now. It's something that has kind of faded into the darkness. We got to get back to reality and require them to do better. I think that we accept less, and now we're getting less. As an educator, I see a lot of parents who are lackadaisical, who are not doing their job as parents. And so the generation is getting worse rather than getting better. There was a time when our generations were moving in a positive realm, but now they're not. And the reason that that's not happening is because the parents aren't taking ownership and nobody's requiring these people to do exactly what's necessary.
We are speaking with Dr. Marco Clark, who's the founder of the Richard Wright Public Charter School in Washington, D.C. He's a friend of the show, and he's also known as America's toughest principal. And he's also the host of Tough Talk. Dr. Clark, to be quite honest, do we or many in our community help promote these negative images of us? If so, how can we stop this? Or is it a case where people are going to think what they want to think anyway, which appeals to their cognitive dissonance?
I think the value of this hip hop music that's out now and what you see in the videos, that's the propaganda that I think mainstream wants to see us believe. And many of our young people have bought into the hype, and they don't see beyond that music video. They don't see beyond the glitz and glamour of Lil Wayne and others who really they're one in a million. It's not going to be, you're not going to find many Little Waynes that's going to make it and be popular and have dollars, but there's going to be many Little Waynes not going to make it. I think that it's very important for us not to buy into these stereotypes, but these cases have worked against, and it's been part of something to help promote it, that it's our reality when it's really not.
In your opinion, what are some of the resources we can and should use to teach our youth when we're trying to teach them about the detrimental effects of propaganda, how it's been used and how it's being used in present day?
We have to teach them the history. We have to teach them the history, teach them actually what the African American struggle has been. The problem with our millennials in this 21st century is that they don't know from whence they've come. And so, therefore, with them not knowing exactly where they came from and the struggle that's been a part of our people, then they're doomed to repeat it again. And so, what we're seeing now, we're fighting a struggle, and everybody's upset, but the kids are really reacting to something that they don't have knowledge of. And so we have an expectation that's unreal for them because nobody has taught them what the struggle has been. And the only way that we're going to begin to do that is that we must get to basics. The Jewish community says never again. And every generation that has come thereafter has learned the history before.
Great
And
point.
they understand the struggle. And the struggle is what has kept them in a very vibrant community. And what we've done as a community, we were able to, before we were walking with no shoes, and then we were able to drive Cadillacs and Mercedes. And so now that we moved beyond, we thought, you hear folks saying, we don't need to talk about that anymore. We're beyond that. Well, you're never beyond something that's been detrimental. The word I like to use and refer back to is that you can forgive but never forget.
Yes.
The problem is that we have forgiven and forgotten,
Yes.
and by forgiven and forgotten, we have missed the point, and missed the point is it has gotten us to where we are now.
And one quick question that just came to mind. If we do indeed, if we're successful in teaching middle school children, starting with middle school children, about history and teaching them about the past struggles of our people, do you think they could get a better understanding about how to develop policies in the future as they grow, how they can develop policies that will fight against those kind of practices?
Absolutely, and I'll start by using my school as an example. We named the school Richard Wright Public Charter School for a reason. Richard Wright, the author, Richard Wright Public Charter School, the journalism school. Richard Wright, the author, a person who was very conscious about his community and coming from a very oppressed community. Richard Wright Public Charter School, the school that's situated and operates and services kids from the lowest socioeconomic background, had a lot of commonality with Richard Wright, the author. What has been our responsibility is to teach how those two are synonymous and letting them understand here's what Richard Wright did in the face of adversity. Here's what Richard Wright students can do in the face of adversity. If you put the two together, now you've created a network of positivity that's going to change the community the same way Richard Wright did. He took a stand for what he thought was right. He developed his voice through academics and went back and changed his community one person at a time. At Richard Wright Charter School, it's about rewriting the future one student at a time. So when kids understand how their history relates to where they are and how history is relevant to what is going on now, then they recognize how they can be a change agent for the future.
Now, to effectively combat against the spread of propaganda, it will take public information, messaging, and intense efforts to get the messaging out there. What channels or mediums, or spokespeople even, or other would you recommend be used to do this?
I think writing is very, very important voice. And what we're transcending our young people to understand is that this video and social media is just not the answer. One of the greatest moments in time when we had our writers is that they articulated things on paper that they never had a stage to voice. And so that is one of the biggest vehicles that we have to get back to because it fed information and left information that could be used for hundreds of years. To me, that's the greatest greatest vehicle that we could ever be used to motivate and to change what's happening.
In your opinion, is propaganda spread out of fear or hatred or both?
I think propaganda is spewed out of both. I really believe that um, fear comes from your responsibility of reaction. I think that the hatred comes from those things that are taught, and the propaganda is a vehicle to push both. And unfortunately, both of those have a negative ending. And so, in order to really get past that, we definitely have to understand the circle of propaganda and how it can be used, how it's always been used in a negative sense to support those things that would be critical to one particular culture or to an entire race.
Dr. Clark, final question. I just wanted to ask you, and this is off topic, by the way. In my opinion, African Americans showed up in massive numbers to vote for and elect President Barack Obama twice. They were very integral in doing so. But we failed him in the midterms because we didn't show up in the massive numbers like we did for the presidential election. What's your opinion about this?
I think we got caught up in propaganda. We forgot about the fact that the president holds one seat, but there's two houses that need to be cultivated, and we left him hanging. We did not hold him to the responsibility of the community. We just assumed that these things could happen like he had a magic wand, and we left him hanging in the midterm. I think that a lot of us are uh, felt like that the president possibly could have done a lot more in office, but we forget the fact that we didn't support him. We didn't support him in the midterms elections, which would have given him the vote. We also are some things I believe that the community, we didn't take the time to really understand or challenge the people that were holding up these districts to make sure they were in line with those things that would support our community. So we missed the boat. The bottom line is that we missed the boat, and we were so caught up in the height of having our first African American president and the emotions of it all that we did not take the time to really understand the process and those things that would be detrimental for our community for years to come.
We have been speaking with Dr. Marco Clark, who's the founder of the Richard Wright Public Charter School in Washington, D.C. He's a friend of the show, and he's also known as America's toughest principal. And he's the host of Tough Talk. And today we were discussing how has propaganda been used against black people and how it's being used today. And he was so very kind to give us some of his very valuable time today. Dr. Clark, before I let you go, could you please tell us about, I guess it's one of your new endeavors, Tough Talk?
Tough Talk is my new show. We're having some real hard conversation with some people. I want to kill some of this propaganda, and I've been having some very hard conversations with members of our community around what needs to happen in order to change things. I got to hold parents totally responsible for kids not coming to school, kids not doing their work, and not being responsible adults. I have to hold the community responsible for beating my kids up on the way home because kids aren't afraid of anybody of a different culture. They're getting accosted by folks that look like them.
Yeah.
I'm holding the community accountable for not allowing our community should not be dirty and nasty and filthy and riddled with all sorts of negative things. And lastly, I'm holding the community accountable for killing each other, and then being upset when we have a person in the White House that wants to declare martial law. We got to do better as a community, and this takes some real tough talk, and it's going to irritate some people, some of the things that I have to say, but it needs to be said. It was said in the 40s. It was said in the 50s. It was said in the 60s and in the 70s in the African American community. If you got in trouble at the end of the block, before you got home, you had people that put you in your place before you got to your house. And that's the reality that we have to get back. We got to stop overlooking things, and somebody got to stand up and have some tough talk and make sure it gets done.
How can we access your new show, Tough Talk?
Tough Talk is a YouTube show. It's also aired every Monday at 9 a.m. It's on every social media outlet that you can find at 9 a.m. If you tune in, you can go and like me on Facebook at Marco Clark, or they can like me on Twitter at Dr. Marco Clark. It will be loaded, and it's on YouTube at Dr. Marco Clark, and you will be able to find it each Monday morning at 9 a.m. And anybody that would love to be a guest on the show, free. I'm going to have you on there. We got to do some tough talk and some things we got to do.
Oh, I would love that.
they can
Oh,
also they can also reach me at 860-997-680.
great. I'm going to put that in the podcast, and going to plug the daylights out of this tough talk, because I was looking at it as I was prepping for this interview, and quite frankly, I love what you had to say. And like you said, it's going to make some people uncomfortable, but that's too bad.
Just too bad.
You know, I really could care less about one's feelings when we have our little ones, literally little ones, being shot dead in the street. No matter who's shooting them, people are shooting them and they're dead. And
Right.
I don't care how many marches you have. I don't care how many great speeches you give. If we don't take some kind of action, whether it be through policy, whether it be through applying pressure to our elected officials, it's going to continue to happen, because there are so many facets to the problem that you know, we need to address it, and it needs to be addressed,
Hmm.
and some people need to be awakened. You know.
Right. They do. They do.
Now, any are there any other projects that you are involved in? Please feel free to give it to us.
Uh, yeah, my book will be out this month. I don't have the actual date. Check with the agent, but it's going to be out next month. It's called "Parents, Where Are You? The Kids Are Out of Control," and it is ready to hit market next in March. So we're looking forward to push that along. So these two major projects with Tough Talk and the new book is really going on. And then I have a new project I can't talk about right now, but I'm sure we'll have some good dialogue about it. 2018, we're going to have a major campus going to be developed here in the District of Columbia. So I'll be sharing more information with that. This is going to blow your mind. It's going to change what has to happen in our community, because we have to work together to get some people to minds right in order to change all of this propaganda that's been negatively placed on us.
Great. Well, certainly we look forward to having you back on the show to discuss that. And you know, if we have to do it every week, I'm certainly down for it. You know, and
All right.
that's going to do it for us today. And again, Dr. Marco Clark, thank you so much for giving us some of your very valuable time today. And you be well, and we'll talk to you down the road.
Be well, my friend. Keep doing what you're doing. We need your voice. Thank you so much.
Thank you, brother.